The sound of poker chips clicking against worn wood filled the smoke-thick saloon as Nora Oliver watched her husband's trembling hands reach for another card, and she knew with cold certainty that her life was about to shatter. Raymond Oliver had been drinking since noon, his eyes glazed with desperation and whiskey, and the pile of coins before him had dwindled to nothing more than dust and promises. Julesburg, Colorado. In the summer of 1873 was a rough town perched on the edge of civilization, where the railroad brought fortune-seekers and degenerates in equal measure, and tonight it seemed determined to swallow her whole. She stood behind Raymond at a careful distance, her calico dress damp with perspiration in the stifling heat of the crowded room. The other men at the table watched with the patient hunger of vultures, knowing what she knew but had refused to accept until this very moment. Her husband had nothing left to wager, nothing except the one thing he had no right to gamble away. "I am out of money," Raymond said, his words slurring together as he stared at his cards. 3 queens stared back at him, a hand he believed was unbeatable, a hand that would solve all their problems if only he could stay in the game. Across the table, the cowboy leaned back in his chair with an expression that revealed nothing. Nathan Vaughn was his name, and Nora had seen him around town for the past 2 weeks, always watching, always quiet. He was younger than most of the weathered men who frequented the saloons, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of winter sky. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the usual drifters and card sharks. He carried himself with a stillness that suggested violence held carefully in check, and his gun hung low on his hip with the ease of long familiarity. "Then perhaps you should fold," Nathan said, his voice carrying a softness that somehow cut through the noise. Raymond's face flushed red. "I have something better than money, something worth more than all the gold in this God-forsaken territory." Nora felt ice slide down her spine, despite the oppressive heat. She wanted to run, to disappear into the night, but her legs would not obey. The saloon had gone quiet, every eye turning toward their table. "Raymond," she whispered, but he did not hear her or did not care to. "My wife," Raymond said, gesturing toward her without looking. "She is worth $1,000 easy, young, strong, good-looking enough. I will wager her against your pot." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Nora's vision swam, her breath catching in her throat, as the reality of what he had just done crashed over her. She was 22 years old, married for 3 miserable years to a man who had promised her a good life and delivered nothing but disappointment and poverty. But this was beyond anything she had imagined possible. Nathan's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes finally lifted to meet hers across the room. Something flickered in that pale gaze, something she could not name. When he spoke, his voice was even quieter than before. "A man who would bet his wife does not deserve to have one." "Then take her," Raymond said with a desperate laugh. "Take her and let me stay in the game." "Show your cards first," Nathan said. Raymond spread his hand across the table with a triumphant flourish. 3 queens and 2 fives, a full house. Several men whistled low, and Raymond's grin widened. He thought he had won. He thought his gamble would pay off and Nora would remain his property, and they would have money enough to survive another few months of his drinking and gambling. Nathan laid down his cards one by one, 3 kings and 2 aces, a better full house. The air left Raymond's lungs in a rush. "No," Raymond said, shaking his head. "No, that is not possible. You cheated. You must have cheated." "I did not cheat," Nathan said, standing slowly. He was tall, taller than Raymond by several inches, and when he moved toward the other man, there was a predatory grace to it. "You made a wager, and you lost. Those are the rules of the game." Raymond surged to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "I will not let you take her. She is my wife, mine. You gave up that right the moment you put her on the table, like she was nothing more than a horse or a gun," Nathan said. And now there was an edge to his voice, a coldness that made the other men step back. Nora watched as if from a great distance as her husband reached for the pistol at his belt. She wanted to scream a warning, wanted to do something, anything, but her voice had abandoned her. Raymond was drunk and clumsy, his fingers fumbling with the leather strap that secured his weapon. Nathan's hand moved faster than thought. His revolver cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Raymond jerked backward, a neat hole appearing between his eyes, and then he collapsed onto the floor in a heap of limbs and broken dreams. The silence that followed was absolute. Smoke drifted from the barrel of Nathan's gun as he stood over Raymond's body, his face expressionless. Then he turned to look at Nora, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been regret or might have been nothing at all. "Madam," he said, holstering his weapon, "I apologize for what just happened. No woman should have to witness such a thing." Nora found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "You killed him. He was drawing on me. Every man here will testify to that." Nathan glanced around the room, and several heads nodded quickly. It was self-defense, plain and simple. The sheriff arrived within minutes, summoned by the sound of gunfire. He was an older man with a graying beard and tired eyes that had seen too much violence in too many years. He questioned Nathan and the other witnesses, examined Raymond's body where it lay cooling on the sawdust floor, and finally nodded. "Self-defense," the sheriff confirmed. Raymond Oliver was known for his temper and his foolishness. Only surprising he lasted this long. He turned to Nora. "My condolences, Mrs. Oliver. The undertaker will see to your husband's burial. Town will pay for it, seeing as how he does not appear to have left you anything else." Nora felt numb. She should have been crying, should have been devastated, but all she felt was a hollow emptiness where emotions should have been. Raymond had been a poor husband, cruel in small ways and neglectful in larger ones. But he had been hers. And now he was gone. Shot dead over a card game he had no business playing. Nathan approached her carefully, as one might approach a skittish horse. "Mrs. Oliver, I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss the situation." "The situation?" she repeated, the words tasting bitter. "You mean the fact that my husband wagered me like property, and you won me like a prize." "I mean the fact that you are now alone in a rough town with no money and no protection," Nathan said quietly. "I do not hold with the idea that a woman can be owned or won. That hand of cards does not give me any rights over you, but it does mean that people in this town will think I have a claim, and that might keep you safer than being completely unattached." Nora stared at him, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "You want me to pretend to be yours? I want you to accept my protection until you can figure out what you want to do next. If you have family somewhere, I will pay for your passage to them. If you want to stay here and make a life for yourself, I will help you find respectable work. But tonight, right now, you need somewhere safe to sleep and someone to make sure no one bothers you." It was not a declaration of love or a romantic proposal. It was practical, even kind in its way, but it still felt like being traded from one man to another. Nora wanted to refuse, wanted to spit in his face and storm out into the night to make her own way. But she was practical too, practical enough to know that a woman alone in Julesburg would not last long before finding herself in circumstances far worse than anything Raymond had subjected her to. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the words scraping her throat raw. "No family, no friends here. Raymond brought me out from Missouri 3 years ago, promising a fresh start. This is what a fresh start looks like." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "Then you will come with me. I have a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Patterson runs it, very respectable. She will have a spare room you can take, and I will pay the rent until you are settled." "Why?" Nora asked. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." He was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. "Because I have seen what happens to women with no protection in towns like this. Because your husband was a fool and a coward. But that does not mean you should suffer for his mistakes. And because I may have won that hand of cards, but that does not make me the kind of man who would take advantage of such circumstances." There was something in his voice, a conviction that made her want to believe him. Nora nodded slowly, knowing she had little choice, but also sensing that perhaps, just perhaps, this stranger might actually mean what he said. They left the saloon together, walking through streets lit by oil lamps and the occasional burst of raucous laughter from other establishments. The summer night was warm, the air heavy with the scent of horses and dust and distant rain that never quite seemed to arrive. Nora kept her eyes forward, aware of the stares that followed them, the whispers that would already be spreading through town. By morning, everyone would know what had happened. By morning, her reputation would be decided by strangers who cared nothing for the truth. Mrs. Patterson answered the door in her nightgown and wrapper, her gray hair in a braid over one shoulder. She listened to Nathan's brief explanation with sharp eyes that missed nothing, then turned her gaze on Nora with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been calculation. "I have a small room in the back," she said finally. "Not much, but it is clean and private. You will take your meals with the other boarders, and I expect help with the washing and cooking to offset some of the rent." "Thank you," Nora said, relieved beyond measure to have a place to lay her head that did not belong to Nathan Vaughn. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a window that opened onto the back garden and a door that locked from the inside. Mrs. Patterson provided her with a nightgown and a quilt that smelled of lavender, and then left her alone with a candle and her thoughts. Nora sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel. Tears came in hot, angry waves, not for Raymond, but for herself, for the life she had hoped to have and the reality she had gotten instead. She cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen and her throat ached, and then she lay down and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices in the kitchen. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or why her eyes hurt so much. Then it all came rushing back, and she had to fight down a fresh wave of panic. There was a knock at her door, soft but insistent. "Mrs. Oliver, breakfast is ready if you are hungry." Nora rose and dressed in the same calico dress from the night before, her only dress now, since everything else had been in the room she had shared with Raymond above the stable where he worked. She would need to retrieve her things, face the curious stares and whispered comments, but not yet. Not until she had gathered enough strength to walk through town with her head high. The kitchen was warm and full of good smells. Mrs. Patterson stood at the stove, flipping flapjacks with efficient movements, while 3 other boarders sat at the long wooden table. Nathan was not among them, and Nora felt an unexpected flutter of something that might have been disappointment. "Sit down, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, not unkindly. "You look like you could use a good meal." The other boarders introduced themselves. 2 were railway workers, rough men with calloused hands who nodded respectfully but said little. The third was a school teacher named Miss Hartley, a thin woman with intelligent eyes who looked at Nora with open curiosity. "I heard about what happened last night," Miss Hartley said as she passed the butter. "Terrible business, but perhaps for the best in the long run. Your husband was not a good man, if you will forgive me for saying so." Nora did not know how to respond to such blunt honesty. "You knew him?" "Only by reputation. He owed money all over town and drank more than he worked. You will be better off without him, though I know that is cold comfort right now." It should have stung, hearing her marriage dismissed so easily. But Miss Hartley was right. Nora had known for a long time that Raymond was dragging her down, but leaving him had never seemed possible. Women did not simply leave their husbands, not without scandal and ruin. Now he had left her instead, in the most permanent way possible, and she was free even if that freedom came wrapped in circumstances she never would have chosen. Nathan appeared just as she was finishing her coffee. He had cleaned up since last night, his dark hair still damp from washing, his clothes neat. He caught her eye and nodded toward the door. "Mrs. Oliver, might I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped out onto the front porch, where the morning sun was already growing hot. Julesburg stretched before them, a town of false fronts and mud streets, of ambition and desperation mixed in equal measure. "I spoke with the sheriff this morning," Nathan said. "There will be an inquest, but it is a formality. No charges will be filed. Your husband will be buried this afternoon if you want to attend." "I do not know if I do," Nora admitted. "Is that terrible?" "It is honest. There is no law that says you have to mourn a man who treated you poorly." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I also spoke with Mr. Henderson at the Mercantile. He is looking for someone to help in the store, sorting stock and assisting customers. The pay is not much, but it is respectable work. I mentioned you might be interested." Nora felt a surge of gratitude mixed with suspicion. "Why are you doing all this? You do not owe me anything." "Maybe I feel responsible. If I had folded instead of calling your husband's bluff, things might have turned out differently. He would have found another game, another table. He would have lost eventually because that is all he ever did." She looked at Nathan directly, trying to read the thoughts behind those winter-colored eyes. "You could have let him draw his gun a little faster. You could have not shot him at all." "He would have killed me if he had been quicker," Nathan said. "Or tried to, at least. And yes, I could have let him succeed. But I am not in the habit of dying to make things more convenient for other people. There was a hardness in his voice that reminded Nora he was not just some kind stranger, but a man who had killed without hesitation, who wore his gun like it was part of his body. She should have been afraid of him, but she was not. Something in her recognized something in him, a loneliness that matched her own. "I will take the job at the Mercantile," she said, "and I will pay you back for the room as soon as I am able. That is not necessary. It is to me." He smiled then, just a slight curve of his mouth, but it changed his whole face. "You are stubborn, Mrs. Oliver. My name is Nora. I think we can dispense with formalities given the circumstances." "Nora?" he repeated, and the way he said it made something warm unfold in her chest. "I am Nathan, though I suppose you already knew that." They stood together on the porch, not quite strangers anymore, but not yet friends, while the town woke around them and began its daily business. Nora felt the weight of stares from passers-by, saw curtains twitch in windows as neighbors watched and gossiped. She lifted her chin and refused to look away. "Let them talk," Nathan said quietly, following her gaze. "In a few weeks, there will be some new scandal, and they will forget all about us." "Will you still be here in a few weeks?" She had not meant to ask, had not meant to reveal that she cared one way or another, but the words escaped anyway. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I was planning to move on. I usually do not stay in one place very long, but I think I might linger for a while. Julesburg seems like it might have opportunities for a man willing to work." "What kind of work do you do, besides playing cards and shooting people, I mean?" That almost smile appeared again. "I have done a bit of everything, cowboying mostly, driving cattle, breaking horses, ranch work. I am good with my hands, and I do not mind hard labor. Someone in town will have use for me." The undertaker came that afternoon to inform Nora that her husband's body had been prepared and would be buried at sunset. She attended the funeral because it seemed like the right thing to do, standing alone at the graveside, while the preacher said words that meant nothing over a man he had never met. Nathan did not come, and she was grateful for that small mercy. When it was over, she walked back to the boarding house and locked herself in her room, feeling as if a door had closed on one part of her life while another stood open before her, terrifying in its possibilities. She started work at the Mercantile the next morning. Mr. Henderson was a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a practical attitude. He showed her around the store, explained what he needed, and left her to sort through a shipment of dry goods that had arrived on the train. It was simple work, mindless in a way that Nora found soothing. She could lose herself in the rhythm of folding fabric and stacking canned goods, could forget for hours at a time what her life had become. Nathan came into the store that afternoon, his boots loud on the wooden floor. He touched the brim of his hat when he saw her. "Afternoon, Nora. I need to purchase some supplies." She helped him gather what he needed, soap and tobacco and ammunition for his revolver. Their fingers brushed when she handed him his change, and she felt that strange warmth again, that sense of connection she did not understand and was not sure she wanted. "I found work at the Chambers Ranch," he told her, as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Starting tomorrow, they need someone to help with the horses." "That is good," she said, meaning it. "You will be staying in Julesburg then?" "For now." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner sometime. Nothing improper, just a meal at the hotel restaurant. I thought you might enjoy getting out of the boarding house." Nora's first instinct was to refuse. It was too soon. People would talk. It would look like she had not mourned her husband at all, but then she thought about what Miss Hartley had said, about Raymond not being a good man, about her being better off without him. She thought about the years she had wasted being afraid of what people would think, of following rules that never seemed to apply to men. "I would like that," she said. "When?" "Sunday evening, after church if you go." "I will be there." They settled into an unexpected routine over the following weeks. Nathan worked at the Chambers Ranch during the day, breaking horses and mending fences and doing all the hard labor that ranch life required. Nora worked at the Mercantile, learning the stock and the customers, proving herself capable and reliable. On Sundays, they had dinner together at the hotel, sitting in the restaurant where everyone could see them, making it clear that whatever was between them was open and honest. At first, their conversations were cautious, each of them revealing only small pieces of themselves. Nathan told her about growing up in Texas, about a mother who had died when he was young, and a father who had drunk himself to death before Nathan turned 16. He had been on his own since then, drifting from town to town, never quite finding a place that felt like home. Nora told him about Missouri, about parents who had died of fever when she was 18, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Raymond had seemed like salvation, a man with plans and ambition, and she had married him quickly, desperately, only to discover too late that his plans were nothing but talk, and his ambition extended no further than the bottom of a whiskey bottle. "I was so stupid," she said one evening as they walked back from dinner. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I should have known better." "You were young and alone and scared," Nathan said. "That does not make you stupid. It makes you human." She looked at him, this man who had killed her husband and then offered her kindness, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the possibility of love, the first tentative shoots of something that might grow given time and care. Summer faded into fall, and the heat of August gave way to the cooler days of September. Nora had saved enough money to start paying Nathan back for the room, though he tried to refuse it. They argued about it outside the boarding house one evening, their voices rising until Mrs. Patterson stuck her head out the door and told them to either take their quarrel inside or quiet down. "I do not need your money," Nathan said, frustration clear in his voice. "I have plenty from the ranch work." "And I do not need your charity," Nora shot back. "I am not some helpless thing that needs to be taken care of. I can stand on my own." "I know you can. That is not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" He stared at her, his pale eyes intense in the fading light. "It is about me wanting to help you because I care about you, not because I think you are helpless." "There is a difference, Nora." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Nora's heart was pounding, her breath coming fast. "You care about me." "Yes." He said it simply, without embellishment or apology. "I have been trying not to, trying to keep my distance because I know this whole situation is complicated and strange, but I cannot seem to help it. I care about you." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not sad tears. "I care about you too. I have been trying not to as well, telling myself it is too soon, that people will judge me. But I am tired of caring what other people think. I am tired of living my life according to rules that never made me happy." Nathan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I am not like your husband. I would never hurt you or betray you or treat you like property. If you gave me your trust, I would guard it like gold." "I know," she whispered. "I have seen who you are, Nathan. I am not afraid of you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough from work, but gentle in their touch. "May I kiss you?" She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Then Nathan's arms came around her and pulled her closer, and Nora let herself melt into him, let herself feel things she had thought were lost to her forever. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. "I do not want to rush you. I know you are still recovering from everything that happened." "You are not rushing me," Nora said. "This feels right. You feel right." They told Mrs. Patterson the next day that they were courting officially. The older woman looked between them with knowing eyes and nodded her approval. "About time. I have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Just make sure you do things proper. I will not have any scandal in my house." There was no scandal, though there was plenty of talk. Some people thought Nora was moving on too quickly, that she should have mourned longer before allowing another man into her life. Others whispered that she and Nathan must have been involved before Raymond's death, that perhaps the whole card game had been engineered to get rid of an inconvenient husband. Nora learned to ignore the gossip, to hold her head high, and live her life according to her own conscience rather than the judgments of strangers. Nathan was courting her in the old-fashioned way, with flowers picked from the prairie and Sunday dinners and long walks through town. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but she could feel the heat beneath his careful control, could see the want in his eyes when he thought she was not looking. By October, when the aspens turned gold in the mountains and the first frosts touched the ground, Nora knew she was in love. It crept up on her gradually, not the wild passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. She loved the way Nathan listened when she talked, really listened as if her words mattered. She loved his quiet strength, the way he could gentle a frightened horse or stand up to a drunk causing trouble in the mercantile. She loved the rare smiles he gave her, the ones that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside and transform his usually serious face. She was closing up the mercantile one evening when Nathan came to walk her home, as had become his habit. The sky was the deep purple of dusk, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "Mr. Chambers offered me a permanent position," he said as they walked. "Foreman of the ranch. It is good money, steady work, and it comes with a small house on the property." Nora felt her stomach drop. "You would be leaving the boarding house." "I would be leaving the boarding house," he confirmed. "But I was hoping you might consider leaving it too." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "What are you saying?" Nathan took her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I am saying that I love you, Nora. I think I have loved you since that first night when I saw you standing in the saloon, trying so hard to be brave. I know this has all happened fast, and I know people will talk no matter what we do. But I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. Marry me, be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Nora's vision blurred with tears. "You love me." "More than I thought I could love anyone," he said quietly. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, and the kindest, and being with you makes me want to be better than I am. So yes, I love you. The question is whether you love me enough to take a chance on a future together." "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her like it had been waiting to be released. "Yes, I love you. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw or what they would say. Nora kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy that had been building inside her, and for the first time since that terrible night in the saloon, she felt truly free. They were married a month later in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson stood up as witness, along with Mr. Chambers from the ranch. Miss Hartley came and cried through the whole ceremony. Even Mr. Henderson from the mercantile attended, giving Nora a generous wedding gift and the promise that she could continue to work at the store as long as she wanted. Nora wore a new dress, simple blue cotton with white lace at the collar, and carried a bouquet of the last wildflowers of the season. Nathan wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that her breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. The preacher said the words, they exchanged vows, and just like that, Nora Oliver became Nora Vaughn. The house on the Chambers Ranch was small, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Nathan carried her over the threshold while she laughed, and then they were alone for the first time, as husband and wife. He was gentle with her that night, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Nora had expected marriage to be a duty based on her experience with Raymond, but with Nathan, it was a revelation. There was tenderness in his touch, passion tempered with care, and afterward, she lay in his arms feeling like she had finally found the home she had been searching for all her life. Winter came to Colorado, bringing snow and cold winds that howled across the plains. Nora learned to be a ranch wife, cooking meals for the hands, helping with the endless chores that ranch life required, even learning to ride a horse under Nathan's patient instruction. She continued to work at the mercantile a few days a week, treasuring the independence it gave her and the friendships she was building in town. Nathan was everything Raymond had not been. He was faithful and hardworking and kind. He made her laugh with dry observations about the people they knew. He held her when she woke from nightmares about that night in the saloon, soothing her back to sleep with whispered reassurances. He treated her like a partner, asking her opinion on ranch business and listening when she offered advice. By spring, Nora suspected she was pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Nathan, and when she finally did, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down and apologized for being too rough, which made her laugh. "I am having a baby, not made of glass," she said, touching his face. "You do not have to treat me like I might break." "I know, but I cannot help it. You are carrying our child, Nora. That makes you precious beyond measure." Their son was born in December of 1874, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas, after Nathan's father, hoping to give the name a better legacy than it had before. Nathan was besotted with the baby, coming in from the fields to hold him and sing him to sleep with old cowboy songs that were completely inappropriate for an infant, but made Nora smile anyway. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Nora kept waiting for something to go wrong, for the universe to remind her that happiness was not something she was allowed to keep, but the disasters she feared never came. Nathan proved to be as steady and reliable as the seasons, and their love only deepened as they built their life together. Thomas learned to walk and then to run, tearing around the ranch like a small whirlwind, while his parents watched with equal parts amusement and exhaustion. By the time he was 3, Nora was pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter with red hair like Nora's mother, and a smile that could light up a room. They named her Sarah, and Thomas was immediately protective of his baby sister, following her around like a devoted guardian. The years passed in a blur of work and love and ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were shared. Nathan became one of the most respected men in the county, known for his fair dealing and his skill with horses. Nora's mercantile work evolved into a partnership with Mr. Henderson, and when he retired, he sold her the store at a price she could actually afford. She ran it with Miss Hartley's help, and it became a gathering place for the women of Julesburg, a spot where they could talk freely and support each other. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Nora would think about that night in the saloon. She would think about Raymond and his terrible decision, about the sound of the gunshot and the look in Nathan's eyes when he had turned to her. It should have been the worst night of her life, and in some ways it was, but it had also been the beginning of something better than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan would ask, pulling her closer in the darkness. "How strange life is," she would answer. "How one moment can change everything." Regrets? None. Not a single one. By 1880, Thomas was 6 and Sarah was 3, and Nora was pregnant with their 3rd child. The ranch was prosperous, the mercantile was thriving, and their life together was everything she had ever wanted. They had added rooms to the house, expanded the porch, planted a garden that bloomed every summer with vegetables and flowers. One Sunday after church, they took the children on a picnic by the river that ran through Chambers Land. It was a perfect June day, warm but not hot, with a breeze that kept the insects away. Thomas and Sarah played in the shallows, while Nathan and Nora sat on a blanket and watched, their hands intertwined. "Do you ever think about where we would be if that night had gone differently?" Nora asked. "If Raymond had won that hand, or if you had left town like you planned?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "I try not to. It seems wrong to be grateful for something that came about the way it did. But I cannot help feeling that maybe it was meant to happen, that maybe we were supposed to find each other, even if the path was a hard one." "I think so too," Nora said. "I think about the woman I was back then, so scared and beaten down. I did not think I deserved happiness, but you showed me different. You showed me what love could be." "You saved me too," Nathan said, turning to look at her. "I was drifting before I met you, going from place to place without purpose. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something that would last. You made me believe I could be more than just a man with a gun and a deck of cards." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling their child move within her. "We saved each other then." "That is the best kind of love," he agreed. Thomas came running up, dripping wet and full of excitement. "Papa, Papa, I caught a fish with my bare hands. Come see." Nathan rose and followed his son to the water, and Nora watched them go, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Sarah toddled over and climbed into her lap, small and warm and smelling of river water. "Mama, when is the baby coming?" she asked, patting Nora's rounded stomach. "A few more months, sweetheart. You will have another brother or sister to play with." "I hope it is a sister," Sarah said decisively. "Thomas is always too rough." Nora laughed and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "We will love whoever it is, rough or gentle." Their 3rd child was born in September, another boy they named Daniel. He had Nathan's pale eyes and a peaceful temperament that was a relief after Thomas's boundless energy. Nathan joked that they were building their own small army, and Nora joked back that they might need one given how wild Thomas was getting. But truly, she would not have changed a thing. Every morning, she woke grateful for the life they had built together. Every night, she fell asleep in Nathan's arms feeling safe and loved. The trauma of her first marriage had faded to a distant memory. something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. The town of Julesburg continued to grow and change around them. The railroad brought more settlers, and what had been a rough frontier town slowly civilized itself with schools and churches and even a library. Nora became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and helping new families get settled. Nathan served on the town council, his voice respected even by those who remembered him as the stranger who had shot Raymond Oliver. That shooting had become part of local legend, told and retold until it barely resembled the truth. In some versions, Raymond had been a dangerous outlaw and Nathan a hero. In others, it was a tragic tale of love gone wrong. Nora and Nathan never bothered to correct the stories. They knew what had really happened, and that was enough. Miss Hartley married the new schoolteacher in 1882, and Nora stood up as her bridesmaid. Mrs. Patterson finally retired from running the boarding house and came to live with them at the ranch, taking over as grandmother to the children and helping Nora with the endless work that came with a growing family. She had become like family, one more piece of the life they had built from tragedy and circumstance. By 1885, Thomas was 11, Sarah was 8, and Daniel was 6. They were planning to have another child, hoping for another daughter to even out the family. Nora was 34 now, and Nathan was 37, and they had been married for nearly 11 years. It felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, when Thomas came out to join them. He was getting tall, almost up to his father's shoulder, and he had the same serious expression Nathan got when he was thinking hard about something. "Papa, some of the boys at school were talking about you," he said carefully. "They said you killed a man once. They said you shot Mama's first husband." Nora felt her stomach clench, but Nathan remained calm. "That is true. I did." "Why?" Thomas asked. "Were you a bad man?" Nathan glanced at Nora, and she nodded. Their son was old enough to hear the truth, or at least a version of it that would make sense to a boy his age. "Your mother's first husband was not a good man," Nathan said slowly. "He treated her poorly and made bad choices. One of those bad choices involved me, and it ended badly for him. I did what I had to do to protect myself, but I also did it because I could not stand by and watch your mother be hurt anymore." "So you saved her," Thomas said, his voice full of wonder, "like in the stories." "It was not quite that simple," Nora said gently. "Your father did help me, but I also helped myself. Sometimes being saved is not about someone else rescuing you. It is about someone giving you the chance to rescue yourself." Thomas thought about this, his young face serious. "I would protect Mama too if anyone tried to hurt her." "I know you would," Nathan said, ruffling his son's hair. "But I hope you never have to. I hope you grow up in a world where women do not need protecting because people treat each other with respect and kindness. Is that why you and Mama always say please and thank you, even to each other?" "Yes," Nora said. "We believe in treating each other well, every single day. Not because we have to, but because we want to. That is what real love is, Thomas. It is choosing to be kind, even when it would be easier not to be." Their son nodded and then ran off to play with his siblings before bedtime. Nora leaned against Nathan, feeling the solid warmth of him. "He is going to be a good man," she said. "They all are, because they have you as an example." "They have us," Nathan corrected. "We are raising them together, Nora. That is the only way it works." Their fourth child was born in the spring of 1886, and to Sarah's delight, it was a girl. They named her Elizabeth, and she had red hair like her mother and sister and a stubborn streak a mile wide. With 4 children, the house felt constantly full of noise and laughter and the occasional argument, but Nora would not have had it any other way. Nathan had taken over full ownership of the ranch in 1883 when Mr. Chambers retired, and under his management, it had become one of the most successful operations in the region. They raised cattle and horses, supplying the army posts and the reservations and anyone else who needed stock. Nathan had a reputation for honest dealing and quality animals, and his word was considered as good as any written contract. Nora's mercantile had expanded too, becoming more than just a dry goods store. She sold everything from fabric to farm equipment, and she employed 3 other women, giving them the kind of independence and respect she had found so precious when she first started working there. The store was her pride and joy, a symbol of how far she had come from that scared girl in the saloon. The years continued to pass in a steady progression of seasons and small miracles. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his father's quiet strength and his mother's business sense. Sarah developed a love for books and learning that had her talking about becoming a teacher like Miss Hartley. Daniel was the dreamer of the family, always making up stories and drawing pictures of fantastical places. Elizabeth was still young, but she showed signs of being as determined and independent as Nora had been. In 1890, Nora stood in the kitchen of their expanded house, now 8 rooms, with a proper indoor pump and a wood stove that was the envy of every woman in the county. She was 41 years old, her red hair now threaded with silver, her hands marked by years of work, but still strong and capable. Outside, she could hear Nathan working with a young horse, his voice low and patient as he always was with the animals. Thomas was 17 now, helping his father run the ranch and already courting a nice girl from town. Sarah was 14 and top of her class. Daniel was 12 and constantly underfoot with his questions and observations. Elizabeth was 4 and into everything, a miniature tornado of energy and opinions. Mrs. Patterson had passed away peacefully in her sleep the year before, and they had buried her in the family plot on the ranch property. She had been in her 80s and ready to go, she had told them, but Nora still missed her wisdom and her steady presence. The door opened and Nathan came in, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. He was 42 now, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his body still lean and strong from years of ranch work. He crossed the kitchen and pulled Nora into his arms, kissing her the way he still did after all these years, like she was something precious and wonderful. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good. Busy at the store." Sarah got top marks on her history examination. Elizabeth managed to not fall in the horse trough this time, so I am counting that as a victory. Nathan laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Such high standards we have developed." They stood together in the kitchen, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Through the window, Nora could see the sun setting over the land they had built their life on, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Do you remember when we first met?" she asked softly. "Every detail," Nathan said. "The way you stood there trying so hard to be brave, the way your eyes looked when your husband said what he said, the way you looked at me after I shot him, like you could not decide if I was your salvation or your doom." "I think you were both," Nora admitted. "In a way, that night killed the old me just as surely as you killed Raymond. But it let me become someone new, someone stronger. So maybe it was exactly what needed to happen, terrible as it was." "I have never regretted it," Nathan said. "Shooting him, I mean. I know I should. I know it was violent and permanent, and there were probably other ways it could have ended. But I cannot bring myself to regret something that led me to you, to this life, to our children. Does that make me a bad person?" "No," Nora said firmly. "It makes you human. We both had to come through fire to find each other, and I would not change that even if I could. This life we have, Nathan, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I needed." "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. "I will love you until the day I die, and whatever comes after that." "I love you too," she answered, more than words can say. They held each other as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. Somewhere in the house, their children were laughing, arguing, living their lives with the confidence and security that came from being raised in love. The ranch stretched around them, land they had worked and tended and made fruitful through years of effort. The town of Julesburg continued its own life beyond their borders, full of people they had come to know and care for. It had been 17 years since that night in the saloon. 17 years since a desperate gamble and a fatal shooting had changed the course of Nora's life forever. She had been someone's property then, wagered like a horse or a gun, worthless in the eyes of the man who should have cherished her. Now she was a business owner, a mother, a respected member of the community, and most importantly, she was loved truly and deeply by a man who saw her as an equal partner in every way. The road from there to here had not been easy. There had been judgment and gossip, grief and fear, the constant work of building something from nothing. But it had also been full of joy and discovery, of learning what it meant to be loved properly, of creating a family and a home that felt safe and warm and full of possibility. Nora thought about the girl she had been at, 22, standing in that saloon waiting for her life to end. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, would she? Would she want to prepare her for the shock and violence of it? Or was it better that she had not known what the future held? In the end, she decided it did not matter. That girl was gone, transformed by fire and heartbreak into the woman Nora had become. And this woman, standing in her own kitchen with her husband's arms around her, had no regrets. Not about the journey, not about the cost, not about any of it. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, feeling her sigh against him. "That we should expand the house again," she said, surprising herself. "Add another bedroom or two." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes dancing with hope and humor. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "Maybe. Is that terrible? We already have 4 children. Are we being greedy wanting more?" "Not greedy," Nathan said, his hand coming to rest on her stomach, in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "Blessed? We are blessed beyond measure, Nora, and if we have been given the gift of another child, I will be grateful for it." She was 41, which was old for pregnancy, but she was healthy and strong, and they had good medical care now that Julesburg had a real doctor. It would be fine. Everything would be fine, because that was what their life had become. A series of challenges met and overcome together. Their 5th child, a boy they named William, was born in early 1891. The birth was harder than the others had been, and for a few scary hours, Nora feared she might not survive it. But Nathan stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and refusing to leave, even when the doctor suggested he wait outside. When William finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Nora looked up at Nathan through her exhaustion and saw tears streaming down his face. "We did it," she whispered. "We have 5 beautiful children and a life worth living. We did it, Nathan." "You did it," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I am in awe of you every single day." William was their last child, both of them agreeing that 5 was enough, and Nora's body had given all it could give. But 5 was a good number, a full house, as Nathan joked, and their home rang with voices and laughter and the constant motion of a large family. Thomas married his sweetheart when he was 19, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch property. He and Nathan ran the cattle operation together, father and son working in harmony to continue building what they had started. Sarah went away to teacher training in Denver, came back to Julesburg, and took over the school when the old teacher retired. Daniel surprised everyone by showing a talent for mechanics and engineering, and he went to work for the railroad, helping to maintain the trains and tracks that connected their small town to the wider world. Elizabeth and William were still young, but they showed promise in their own ways, Elizabeth with her fierce independence and William with his sunny disposition. By 1895, Nora was 46 and Nathan was 48. They had been married for 21 years, and they had built an empire of sorts, not of money and power, but of love and family and community. The ranch was prosperous, the mercantile was thriving, their children were happy and healthy, and they were still deeply in love. They were sitting on the porch one evening in late summer, the air heavy with the scent of hay and distant rain. The children were scattered, Thomas at his own house with his wife and their new baby, Sarah in town preparing for the school year, Daniel off with the railroad crew, Elizabeth and William finally asleep after a long day of playing. "We should take a trip," Nathan said suddenly. "Just the 2 of us. We have never had a real honeymoon, never gone anywhere just for the pleasure of it." Nora looked at him in surprise. "What brought this on?" "I was thinking about time and how fast it goes. Our children are grown, or nearly so. We have worked hard for 21 years without a break. I want to take you somewhere beautiful and spend time with just you. No distractions, no responsibilities. What do you say? Where would we go?" "Anywhere you want. California to see the ocean, Santa Fe to see the missions, Colorado Springs to see Pikes Peak. Name it, and we will go." Nora thought about it, her practical mind immediately going to all the reasons they could not leave, all the work that would pile up in their absence. But then she thought about being young again, about having adventures, about spending days and nights with Nathan without having to think about anything else. "California," she said decisively. "I want to see the ocean. I want to put my feet in the Pacific and taste salt water and see the sun set over the waves." "Then that is what we will do," Nathan promised. They made the trip that fall, leaving the children in Sarah's capable care and taking the train west through the mountains and across the desert to California. Nora had never traveled so far from home, and every mile brought new wonders. She pressed her face to the window like a child, watching the landscape change from plains to peaks to the golden valleys of California. They spent 2 weeks in San Francisco, staying in a real hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights and restaurants that served food from all over the world. They walked along the waterfront, rode the cable cars, visited Chinatown and the Barbary Coast. Nathan bought her a new dress, something fine and elegant that she never would have purchased for herself, and they went to the theater to see a play. But the best moments were the quiet ones, walking along the beach with the waves crashing at their feet, holding hands like young lovers. Nora tasted the salt water and found it strange and wonderful. She collected shells to bring back to Elizabeth and William. She and Nathan made love in their hotel room with the sound of the city beyond the windows, and it felt like being young again, discovering each other for the first time. "Thank you for this," Nora said one evening as they watched the sun sink into the ocean, painting the sky in impossible colors. "Thank you for insisting we come, for giving me this adventure." "Thank you for agreeing," Nathan said. "Thank you for 21 years of adventures, big and small. Thank you for saying yes to me that day when I asked you to marry me, even though I am sure you had doubts." "I had no doubts," Nora said honestly. "Not about you, not about us. I knew from the start that you were different, that what we had was special. I have never regretted it, Nathan. Not for one single moment." They returned to Julesburg, renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the work and chaos of their lives. The children were thrilled to see them, and the house felt full again in the best possible way. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, seasons passing in their endless cycle. Years continued to accumulate. Thomas and his wife had 3 children, making Nora and Nathan grandparents. Sarah married a lawyer from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often. Daniel fell in love with a railroad executive's daughter and scandalized her family by insisting on marrying for love rather than status. Elizabeth, true to form, announced at 16 that she had no intention of marrying at all and planned to become a doctor, which horrified some of the more traditional members of the community and filled Nora with fierce pride. William, the baby, grew into a kind young man who loved the ranch and planned to work alongside Thomas and Nathan. By 1900, the new century, Nora was 51 and Nathan was 53. They had been married for 26 years, together for 27. Their hair was more gray than not now, their bodies marked by age and work, but the love between them had only deepened with time. They were in town one day, Nora at the mercantile, and Nathan at the feed store, when they ran into an old-timer who had been around since the early days of Julesburg. He looked at them and shook his head in wonder. "I remember when you two first got together," he said. "Caused quite a scandal, as I recall. Some folks said it would never last, that it was built on a bad foundation. But look at you now, still together, still strong. I guess love can grow from anywhere, even the strangest circumstances." After he left, Nora turned to Nathan. "Do you think he is right? That we grew from strange circumstances?" "I think we grew from honest circumstances," Nathan said. "Nothing that happened was easy or simple, but it was real. We both went through fire to find each other, and that makes what we have precious. I would not change it, Nora. Not the beginning, not the middle, not any of it." "Neither would I," she agreed. They walked home together as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to hope for. The ranch spread before them, land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. Behind them, the town of Julesburg continued its existence, a community they had helped build and shape. Nora thought about that night in the saloon one last time, allowing herself to really remember it. The fear, the humiliation, the sound of the gunshot that had ended one life and begun another. It had been terrible and traumatic, and she would not wish such an experience on anyone. But it had also been the catalyst for everything good that had come after, and she could not regret that. Nathan must have sensed her thoughts because he squeezed her hand. "Where are you?" "Right here," she said. "Right where I belong." And it was true. She was exactly where she belonged, walking beside the man she loved, heading home to the family they had created together. The journey from there to here had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had been worth it. Their grandchildren grew, and they had great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and William's care. Elizabeth became a doctor, one of the first women in Colorado to do so, and set up practice in Denver. Sarah's children became lawyers and teachers, carrying on her legacy of education and service. Daniel's railroad career took him all over the West, but he always came home to Julesburg for holidays and family gatherings. Nathan and Nora grew old together, their bodies slowing, but their minds sharp, their love unwavering. They had arguments, as all couples do, but they never went to bed angry. They had hard times, years when the cattle market was bad or drought threatened the ranch, but they weathered them together. They had losses, friends and family members who passed before them, but they comforted each other through the grief. On their 30th anniversary in 1906, their children threw them a party at the ranch. It seemed like the whole county came, filling the house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army. Nora wore a new dress, her red hair now completely silver, her face lined but still beautiful. Nathan stood beside her in his best suit, his arm around her waist, looking at her with the same love that had been there from the beginning. Thomas stood up to make a toast. To my parents, who taught us what real love looks like, who showed us that it is not where you start, but where you end up that matters, who built something beautiful from tragedy and never looked back. We love you both, and we are grateful every day for the example you have set. Everyone raised their glasses, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face. These were her people. This was her family. And it had all grown from that terrible night in 1873 when her husband had wagered her in a card game and the Cowboy had won. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Nora and Nathan sat on the porch under the stars. They were both tired but happy, their hands clasped together. 30 years, Nora said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true, Nathan said. Time is strange that way, but I will tell you this, Nora Vaughn. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be. With me? Always with you, he confirmed, from that first night until my last breath. You are my home, Nora. You always have been. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. And you are mine. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and feeling the cool night breeze on their skin. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn, one of the horses answered with a soft nicker. These were the sounds of their life, familiar and comforting. I think we did all right, Nora said eventually. With our lives, with our children. I think we took something terrible and made it beautiful. We did more than all right, Nathan said. We did something extraordinary. We loved each other truly and raised good people and left the world better than we found it. What more could anyone ask for? What more indeed, Nora thought. She had started out as someone's property, worthless in the eyes of the man who should have cherished her. She had been won in a card game like a piece of livestock, had watched her husband die in front of her. It should have destroyed her, should have left her broken and bitter. Instead, it had led her to Nathan, to this life, to 30 years of love and partnership and joy. She had 5 children who were making their own way in the world, 7 grandchildren and counting, a successful business, and a place in a community that respected her. She had been loved truly and deeply by a man who saw her as an equal, who treated her with kindness every single day, who never made her feel less than. I am glad you won that hand, she said suddenly. I am glad you were sitting at that table that night. I am glad you shot Raymond before he could shoot you. I am glad for all of it, Nathan, because it brought me you. He turned to look at her, his pale eyes shining in the starlight. I am glad too. For all of it, every single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora. The absolute best. They kissed then, slow and sweet. A kiss that held 30 years of love and passion and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Come on, Nathan said, standing and pulling her up with him. Let us go to bed. Tomorrow will be here soon enough, and I want to spend tonight holding you and being grateful for everything we have. They went inside together, turning off lamps and checking doors, the routine of a lifetime. In their bedroom, they undressed and climbed into bed, and Nathan pulled Nora into his arms the way he had every night for 30 years. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, he whispered back. Now and always. Nora closed her eyes and let herself drift, feeling safe and loved and completely content. She had been given a second chance at life that night in the saloon, and she had made the most of it. She and Nathan had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. Their children would remember them, would tell their own children about the love story that had started in tragedy and ended in triumph. The ranch would continue, worked by Vaughn hands for generations to come. The mercantile would serve the community, providing goods and gathering space. Their legacy would live on in 100 different ways, big and small. But more than any of that, their love would endure. It would be the example their children used to measure their own relationships. It would be the standard their grandchildren aspired to. It would be proof that even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures if you were willing to take a chance, to be brave, to love with your whole heart. As sleep finally claimed her, Nora's last thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the cowboy who had won her in a card game, and then spent 30 years proving that she was worth far more than any hand of cards. Gratitude for the life they had built, the family they had raised, the love they had shared. Gratitude for second chances and new beginnings, and the healing power of true partnership. In the morning, they would wake up together as they had for 30 years. They would work and laugh and argue and love, living each day to its fullest. They would continue to build their legacy, continue to show their family what real love looked like, continue to be grateful for every moment they had been given. But for now, they slept. Two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. Two people who had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph. Two people who had loved with their whole hearts and been loved in return. And that, Nora thought, as she finally surrendered to sleep, that was everything. That was the happy ending she had never dared to hope for. The fairy tale that had grown from the ashes of her old life. She and Nathan had their happily ever after, hard-won and precious and absolutely perfect in every way. The years that followed were gentle ones. Nathan and Nora slowed down as their bodies aged, but they remained active and engaged with their family and community. They spent long afternoons on the porch, watching their grandchildren play and sharing stories of the old days. They attended weddings and christenings, funerals and celebrations, always together, always supporting each other. When Nathan finally passed in 1915 at the age of 68, it was peaceful, in his sleep, with Nora beside him. He simply did not wake up one morning, and she held his cooling hand and wept not from regret, but from the knowledge that a chapter had ended. They had been married for 41 years, together for 42, and not a single day had been wasted. Nora lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She ran the mercantile until the very end, her mind sharp even as her body failed. She told stories about Nathan, keeping his memory alive, making sure everyone knew what kind of man he had been. When she finally joined him in 1920, they buried her next to him on the ranch they had built together, under the wide Colorado sky they had both loved. Their children stood at the graveside and celebrated a love that had lasted decades, that had transformed tragedy into triumph, that had shown all of them what was possible when two people committed to loving each other truly. The ranch continued for generations, always in Vaughn hands. The mercantile eventually closed, but the building still stood, a reminder of Nora's independence and business acumen. Their descendants spread across the West, carrying with them the lessons Nathan and Nora had taught about love and partnership and perseverance. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, people said you could still see them on the porch of the old ranch house, two figures holding hands and watching the sunset together, bound by a love that had outlasted even death itself. It was probably just a story, a legend that grew up around two people who had lived extraordinary, ordinary lives. But perhaps it was true. Perhaps love like theirs did not end with death. Perhaps it lingered in the places they had loved, in the family they had raised, in the example they had set. Perhaps Nathan and Nora Vaughn were still together somewhere, still loving each other, still grateful for every moment they had been given. All anyone knew for certain was this. A cowboy had won a woman in a card game in 1873, had shot her husband, and then had spent the rest of his life proving that she was worth infinitely more than any wager. And that woman had taken a chance on love, had chosen to see possibility instead of tragedy, and had built a life beyond anything she had imagined. Their story was one of transformation and redemption, of love growing in unlikely soil and flourishing beyond all expectation. It was proof that endings could become beginnings, that the worst moments could lead to the best futures, that two broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful. And in the end, that was the legacy Nathan and Nora left behind. Not money or property or fame, but the knowledge that love could conquer anything. That partnership made life worth living. And that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale, but something real people could achieve if they were willing to work for it. They had taken their shot at happiness, and they had not missed. They had loved truly and deeply, and they had been loved in return. They had built a family and a life that mattered, that meant something, that would echo through generations. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered. That was the happy ending they had earned, the reward for choosing love over fear, hope over despair, each other over everything else. Nathan and Nora Vaughn had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What more could anyone hope to achieve? They had their happily ever after, and it had been worth every moment of struggle, every hardship overcome, every challenge faced together. Their love story, born in violence and tragedy, had blossomed into something beautiful that would never be forgotten. And, somewhere under the wide Colorado sky, on a ranch that still bore their name, their legacy lived on in the family they had created, the values they had instilled, and the love they had proved was possible. Forever and always, Nathan and Nora Vaughn, together at last, and never to be separated again.